Welcome to the fourth session of first course. Today we're going to talk about psychical body, the important software of psychical body. We're going to talk about the coefficient of lifespan, astral body and the secondary nervous system. We're going to talk about the worldview software, depression and its types, examination of depression chart, and we're going to talk about types of death. The first topic we're gonna discuss is about psychical body. The psychical body is one of the layers of our existence that is responsible for detecting the emotions, the discovery analysis, and presenting the emotions that could come from the step of Eshk as a consequence of a step of Eshk operation, and also the messages that are being related to the brain, being communicated from the brain, and showing the appropriate reactions uh, in regards to those emotions based on the information that is being given to the brain. So essentially, what psychical body does is that uh, passes a certain information to the brain. The brain receives those information and translate it to physical reactions, and that's how the physical reaction associated with those emotions would be presented. For example, if someone's watching a scary movie, the scenes are being observed by the five senses. By we see it, we hear it, and then that goes to the brain. The brain translates it, make it to appropriate information that goes to the various bodies, including mental body, psychical body. And then after going through the perception filter, worldview filter, it would be assessed, and the level of or the howness of the reactions would be determined. And then the appropriate information would be given to the psychical body. The psychical body would basically determine the appropriate reaction to those events, and then those messages would be delivered to the brain, and the brain would translate that to a specific type of information that is related to our physical reactions, and that's how we react to something physically. What we can see in terms of how individuals would react to the same phenomena or event in a different way, it's related to the perception or worldview filter, and how it perceives or uh, assesses the particular event, and that level of determinations and evaluations, the intensity and howness of that would be determining the intensity of the chemical reactions associated with the messages that the psychical body would release. So the chemical reactions that is being produced within our body, for example, adrenaline, in regards to where we get scared, it comes from the messages that is received from the brain to the body, and then the messages that psychical body gave to the brain associated with the production of that adrenaline. So how those messages are being delivered to the brain would determine how intense or in general the quality of those emotions are. So given the fact that psychical body is responsible for emotions, then we know that we have two parts of feelings. We have two subcategories of feelings. One is positive feelings and negative feelings. And these two parts are separate from each other. And as you can see in this image, we have the positive section and we have negative section, and we have this intermediary place that is enthusiasm. And there is a hypothetical cap that could cover one area or the other based on the state or emotional state we are. So if you're in a positive state, the negative section would be capped. And then if you're in a negative state, then the positive section would be capped. So essentially, the positive feelings that are being experienced or being discovered or detected or presented would have effects over. Sorry, I'm just gonna mute. So the positive emotions that we are experiencing, which is associated with a positive part of our psychical body, it puts us in that state, the positive state, and then after that, any negative emission that would be coming toward us would be capped off because we are not able to receive those information. So any of these parts are responsible for discovering and perceiving, releasing, or absorbing the appropriate emissions related to that state. For example, the positive part would perceive and discover the positive feelings. It would absorb and release positive emissions. And that implies that when the positive feelings are present, the brain would basically produce specific chemical messages that are appropriate to that type of feeling, which is positive in this case. And the positive aspects of it would release positive emissions. And if we are affected by those positive emotions, then what we are absorbing is also positive emissions. So it is important to understand the state is the state has a direct connection between the consciousness emission that we're receiving and releasing, or how important it is to stay in the positive state, because while we're in a positive state, because the cap is closing the negative sections, we're not absorbing any negative emissions or negative feelings. So it is important to draw these lines and make these connections because overall it would have an important impact on our worldview and then how we are navigating our own presence and our emotions. So the negative aspects or negative part of a psychical body is responsible for the negative emotions, discovering and perceiving that and presenting it. For example, if someone goes to the state of anger or um, any type of negative emotions, for example, jealousy, it could be hatred, any type of negative emotions, the individual would produce negative emissions, and also their brain produces chemical reactions that poisons the body. And also the person would be vulnerable for absorbing negative emissions as well. And that's what we refer to as the person's being in a negative state. So individuals are either in a positive or negative state at any given moment in time. And no individuals are capable of being at the both states at the same time. So we basically can't be have positive and negative emotions at the same time. We could quickly fluctuate in between, but we never be able to be at both states at the same time. And that basically also corresponds with this image that this cap can't cover both sections, and it's either covering one or the other based on or depending on what type of emotions or states we are in. So, following all our thoughts, actions, behaviors, there are consciousness emissions that we are emitting. And through those consciousness emissions, it determines which of these caps are covered and which are open, and what type of consciousness emissions we are emitting. For example, if someone's look at someone or something with kindness and love, they are emitting that positive consciousness emission, and that person or um, that thing also is being affected by that positive emission. And if someone looks at someone else with hatred or negativity, then they're also impacting them with a negative consciousness emission. And also they are being affected by that negative consciousness emissions as well. And also they getting affected by that negative emotions that comes with the production of the brain being involved with that um, type of state. So it is very important for us to remain in a positive state, because the consequence of the negative states are very, very important, and it can impact ourselves and others in a lot of different ways. So another negative impact of negative consciousness is that it can actually affect our lifespan directly. So the more we are, as you can see again in the image, this gray area is representing the lifespan. The more positive we are, the longer the time span is, the lifespan is, and the more negative we are, the shorter the lifespan is. So the coefficient of cellular entropy, or entropy of our system, is directly related to how positive we are in general, how much we are in a positive state, or how much of our life or moments we are in a positive state, or how much of it we are in a negative state. Depending on that, we are affecting our lifespan, and the more positive it is, the longer it becomes. The coefficient of cellular entropy decreases. The more we are in a positive state, we are healthier. The more we are in a negative state, the coefficient of cellular entropy is less, and we are more prone to develop illnesses and disorder and go toward entropy. The simple reason is that once we are in the positive state, and anything negative cannot be absorbed by our existence, and there's no negative production, chemical production, or neurological responses within our body as a result of the messages that brain gets. And if we are in a negative state, then the positive section is capped. We are not able to absorb or receive any positive emissions. We are also producing a lot of negative chemical reactions within our body, and a lot of negative consequences as a result. So this is the underlying, one of the most important fundamental worldviews that we have in Erfan Halgheh, that we want to avoid negative states at all cost. There is no negative states that is allowed for any reason. Individuals might come up with reasons that they might assume that it's allowed and it's okay to have these negative emotions because of that unique circumstances that they're going through. But in the eyes of Erfan Halgheh, there is no justified negative state. So throughout the course, we really work on developing that worldview, and then having that as a fundamental aspects of our worldview, and then really aiming to embody that remainance of remaining in the positive state at any given moment and any time. We will receive halghehs that will help us to go through that process, but it's also important for us to have that worldview. So when we are catching ourselves in circumstances that could puts us in a negative state, we do our effort, we do our part to not perpetuate that state or go too much with it, and be able to stop it as much as we can and not kind of continuing with that type of state. So it is very important for us to have this worldview. In psychical body, as I mentioned earlier, there is this aspect which is determining the coefficients of humans' lifespan. It is directly related to the positive T consciousness emission and negative T consciousness emission. And it is a software that it kind of assesses that overall emission absorbed and emitted, and it would directly impact that lifespan. In Christianity, we can see that also Jesus, for example, it recommends individuals to, or invite individuals to pray for their enemies. And one of the key factors of this notion is that individuals would have all the good reasons to hate their enemies or have negative emotions toward them. But by that type of operation, they go to a negative state and they become vulnerable themselves as well. And they affect themselves negatively as well. So one of the aspects of that notion to pray for their enemies is that transforming that potential negative emotions by something positive. So the individuals, instead of going to negative state, they would remain in a positive state, because if the enemy already hurt them in different ways, then by going to the negative state, they hurt themselves more, and many more negative aspects in play that we will discuss later. But it is one of the important notions underlying aspects that was discussed there. So other softwares of our existence that would receive the positive and negative energies, and we will examine those aspects. For example, in any type of state, we are absorbing different types of energies. When someone give us compliments, we would receive some sort of energy that can actually positively impact us. Let's say if you're tired, we don't feel tired anymore if someone gives us a lot of compliment, and what we call it so-called good energy. Or even if we would be hungry or needed sleep, if someone give us that energy, kind of like the compliments, and give us uh, that, what we call it, type 2 energy, if we suddenly feel like we're not hungry anymore or we don't feel sleeping anymore. Let's say if someone hears a good news, and from that good news, suddenly 2 seconds before that they were tired and they were hungry, but they get some sort of boost of energy out of that news, that they no longer feel like they're hungry or need sleep. So there are other types of energies that we will discuss as well, and some of these energies are used in psychological warfare. For example, individuals would, in the war, for example, some people use that to get confession or decrease the overall spirit of their opponent, maybe just by um, making some rumors about certain important things. Let's say if their commander is dead, but in reality that's not true, or they overtaken a part of the city, and then through those type of manipulations they want to cause and negative energy and generations, or release a certain amount of their energies. So there are other softwares within our existence as well that it determines the level of satisfaction, and through that we could receive energy or release energy or get decharged. For example, if we buy a car, a used car, and then our friend comes and says like, oh, this is like a scam, and then you lost a lot of money, it's a very bad purchase, the person might just get completely drained from the energy, and it's it's even possible for them to develop a fever or faint. And that just shows how our mental state, our psychological state, our emotions is directly linked to the physical reactions and the chemical productions within the body. And the opposite of that is possible as well, as we just mentioned. If we buy something, used car, and someone tells us like it was like a great purchase, and then we actually bought it very cheap, and then it's a very good choice, we suddenly get a boost of energy. So there's this existential softwares that assesses certain energies within our existence based on certain elements. It is important for us to be aware of that and then know how to control our release and charge, basically charge and discharge of the energy, uh, and keep them within a threshold. And uh, that's what we will be introduced to, and then given various types of halghehs to be able to um, utilize those features and get control. So there are many different existential softwares that have a role in terms of the energies that we have, the positive and negative energies, or the states that we are in, and the impacts that has in our lifespan. Another one of these softwares are the one that it kind of assesses our situation in terms of sin and virtue, and it gives certain scores, positive or negative, depending on how that is um, determined. And following on that, we will either absorb or release or get drained out of energy. So if we get drained out of energy, then the immune system can get weak, and any underlying conditions or any bacteria or viruses present within our body could overcome the immune system and get us involved with that condition. Or vice versa, if you're overall in the positive state, then the immune system can strengthen, and if there are exposure to any viruses or bacterias, we are less susceptible to develop that illness. We could be asymptomatic, for example, in those circumstances, having or carrying the virus but not being directly affected by it. There are other softwares as well that it assesses the desires and needs of human being, and if those needs or desires are not met, then it can give negative scores and determine some negative consequences for our body, and that would result a decharge of the energy. And if they are fulfilled, then we feel the boost of energy and feeling better. The other software associated with these type of energies is idealistic um, type of software that it assesses whether the circumstances we are in is meeting those criterias or not. If it does, then we can get a boost of energy, or if it doesn't, it releases. Another example is that imagine like a soccer game or any sport game, that there are all people like watching it, and they all relatively come in a relatively same emotional state to the arena or watching the game. But if their team would win and they would have a lot of energy and they're even able to, let's say, walk for kilometers or celebrate until late at night, but the other part that lost, then they would feel like the, let's say, the same audience, they have less energy and they're getting decharged from energy and they don't even feel like talking, or they feel like tired and they don't feel having any activities. So what happens there is that if someone reaches that ideal situation, there is an energy associated with either reaching or not reaching that ideal situation, which can drain individuals from energy or give them an energy. So we can see there are a lot of different types of energies that Dr. Taheri actually explained them in much depth and categorization in the new academy. So I encourage you to register in the new academy if you're interested to access those information. But there are many different types of energies that we don't discuss in the old curriculum that is being discussed in detail in there. So there are a lot of energies that we are receiving and releasing depending on certain circumstances. So the energies that are released or received also is being assessed by that software we mentioned earlier, which is our coefficient of lifespan, and has a role to determine that cellular entropy, the coefficient of cellular entropy. And the way that it determines that, the positive energies that is entered and the negative energies that are entered would basically be assessed. And if the positive ones are more than the negative ones, then we see the increase of the lifespan. And if it's the opposite, then we see the decrease of lifespan. So we understand that the health of the human being is directly related to these energies and how we are allowing these type of energies and expose ourselves to not just energies, but also the positive and negative T consciousness emissions. So based on the graph and the image that you're seeing here, that gray area that I mentioned, it shows clearly the relationship between the lifespan with the psychical body, the positive aspects and negative aspects, the absorption and release of the negative emissions or positive emissions or energies, and how that would affect our health. The next topic we're going to talk about is astral body. And astral body has two main role, which is guiding the anatomical growth, and also is taking the role of secondary nervous system. So the anatomical growth is the way that the cells are coming together and starting to form an infant. And after that, also, they would remain active for the purpose of repair and regeneration. The second aspects of it, which is the guiding of a nervous system, is the secondary nervous system, in a way that we have the primary nervous system, which is basically the brain and the physical nervous systems that we know. And we have this secondary nervous system in a way that any electrical or neurological messages that it goes from the brain to any cells or any part would be going through this secondary nervous system and be communicated through that. Just like, imagine a package is sent to an address, and then right at the same time someone pick up the phone and let the person that is receiving a package know that the package is sent and they're expecting to receive it at the particular time. So in this way, before the individuals receiving the package, they already know that something's coming. So in this way, the receptors of the message are ready to receive that message, and they are aware of that package coming. So one of these feature that comes with that operation and functionality is the continuity of the motions, and also the very fast reactions that we have. For example, if something is thrown at us, the way that we react to it, it's not something that we decide and then have a moment to react accordingly, but our body reacts to that instantly, way faster than our mind or be able to actually process that. And the continuity of our motions is also related to the secondary nervous system. And the way that we can examine this is through just looking at how long it would take for the nervous system to receive the information, communicate it to the brain, and receive information from the brain and communicate it back to the cells, and then having the reaction. If you were solely remaining, if you solely were dependent on that primary nervous system, then our motion would be like robotic and choppy. But that's not what we see. We see a continuous motion especially when we are dealing with some martial arts that require very fast movements that are less than second, responses that are instantaneous. For example, the Japanese sorcery, their attack and defense is very, very fast, to the level that their masters tell them that you should not move through your thoughts, but you need to feel. So the execution of the motion is not depend or relying on the thinking, but feeling. So what do they mean by feeling? Even though that they might not actually know the relationship between the astral body and what they're aiming for, but here we clearly determine that what they mean is to activate the ability to use the astral body to respond instead of relying on a physical body and the brain and the logic. So this sensitivity of responding to 0.3 seconds of motion, that the sword can come from any directions, and in some cases the person is also blindfolded, so they don't even see it. So the ability to respond to the correct direction of the sword and feel it and then respond that fast is relying on the secondary nervous system and not the primary nervous system. And the reaction becomes possible through that. It could be said that the subconscious part is controlling that part, but the subconscious automation is related to controlling the automation like typing and driving. But that requires a repetition. It requires a consistent, let's say, location. If someone's a pianist or a musician, like playing certain instruments, has a specific location in claviers or keyboard or driving, things are in a constant location, and the subconscious is able to memorize those locations and just control that automation because of the repetition. But something like the sorcery, that the person is blindfolded and they have no idea the sword gonna come from what direction at any given moment, it's not possible to rely on that subconscious part, and the reaction is actually done by the astral body. Another interesting phenomena is the phantom pain, which is the individuals that have amputated limbs or and they experience pain in the amputated section. So if someone lost their hand or feet, they report that they still feeling pain, or they feel that, let's say, their finger of their feet that they lost is itchy. And a lot of the times they just being said that is a delusion. But here we understand that the individuals are experiencing those pains through the astral body. And that's what is the underlying reason of the feelings of the amputated limbs. So, through a specific sensitivity, for example, in sports, with the expansion and practice and activation of these parts, the threshold of individual sensitivity of environment toward motion becomes much more than regular individuals, that they're able to actually react to those motions by closed eyes. So the secondary nervous system is able to operate and facilitate that operation. And without that, we would not able to do such a thing. And also our movement and our speech would be robotic and choppy. So to recap, the astral body is responsible for the secondary nervous system and also the anatomical growth, and that is how the cells know how to be beside each other to form a specific organ and eventually become an infant in mother's womb, or and the way that it guides that anatomical growth, and also the secondary nervous system that we just discussed. The information related to the howness of uh, the flow of the scan in terms of the certain illnesses that can come with as a result of the disconnection of the astral body with other um, layers of existence, could negatively impact the anatomical growth, and then it can alter the disturb the formation of the infant in a negative way. And then a lot of the defect that we see in the infants is as a result of the lack of harmonious between the various layers of existence that would also impact the astral body in terms of that correct and aligned guiding of the anatomical growth. The next topic we're going to talk about is the worldview and perception filter. And also, we're going to talk about the definition of depression in the eyes of Erfan Halgheh, and how that is also related to this worldview filter and the parts that affects the various layers of existence. So one of the most important topics that we discuss in Erfan Halgheh is the worldview and perception filter. And Dr. Taheri talks about how important this filter and this framework is, because 99% of our issues and illnesses comes from the misaligned worldview filter and the faulty operation that comes as a result. The worldview filter is the way in which the individuals are perceiving and relating uh, the relating to the external circumstances, the environment outside of themselves, the material universe, and incidents that happens, which is being communicated through our five senses to the brain and passes through a filter, which we talk about or refer to as worldview filter. So we see here you have the external events in the physical material world that is being received or experienced or perceived through the sensors, and then those information goes through the worldview filter. The worldview filter would filter those information in a very particular way. This filter is programmed based on the individual's thoughts, beliefs, experiences, individual perceptions, the subjective perceptions, the environmental impact, education, culture, society, etc., etc. And it determines the intensity of those specific circumstances. So basically, anything that happens, it determines if how severe and how not severe, or the howness of overall of that information. And the intrinsic value of that incident or event and other uh, layers of assessments is being operated within this worldview filter. So the worldview filter is the way in which the individuals are perceiving themselves and the external universe or external events. The mind is responsible for that reaction that is on a understanding level, on a perception level, and anything that it perceives, it passes through this filter, and then after that, it would just basically uh, has an output of information after the determination of the intensity and severity, and then those information is passed through the psychical body. So we have the information received through five senses going through worldview filter. The worldview filter give the information after determining the severity. It gives it to the mental body. Mental body, it translates it and determines the operation that is associated with those information received, and give that appropriate information to the psychical body. Psychical body is responsible for the emotion, and based on the received emotions, it gives information to the brain, and the brain would translate those information to in a form of physical messages, which can cause the chemical reactions, the physical reaction overall. And we have the as a result of that, we have the revealing the mental changes via brain, we have revealing the psychical changes, and we have the physical changes that can happen if this information that is being passed down to here in the worldview filter is determined something severe and devastating. Then the mental body receives that information and releases the devastating messages to the psychical body. Psychical body receives that message as devastating, releases the the messages that would determine the severity of that emotions, and the brain would releases those chemicals and give the neurological responses. And then we have these reactions from different levels, on a mental level, psychical level, and a physical level. Now, the more severe it is, the more negative impact we have. And on a mental level, psychical level, physical level, we can see different levels of depression, like mental depression, physical depression, and we can see the physical depression. And here, when it gets to the psychical body reaction, if it's determined as a devastating or depressing information, it despite of the physical reactions that we get from here, we also have a consciousness emission reaction, where we were talking about how here the psychical body is responsible for absorbing and repulsion of positive and negative emission. If the message that comes through the psychical body determines the state is negative, and then we are in a negative state, then we are absorbing and and having a repulsion of the negative emission. And here we have a consciousness emission reaction that can causes the consciousness emission depression. And this is where we were talking about that it can alter individuals' ability to receive epiphanies, revelations, or feel the scan. When we were talking about the reasons behind not feeling the scan was depression. One of them was depression. And we talked about how depression has various levels. And this is basically where we are getting details about what kind of what kind of depression there is. And then the very elementary stages of depression is consciousness emission depression, that the individuals are still showing the signs of positive emotions like laughing or smiling or things like that. On the surface, they might not look depressed, but they do transmit or emit consciousness emission of depression. And then after that, if it gets more severe, it becomes mental depression. The more severe of that becomes psychical depression. On the mental depression, the individual's thought becomes negative. We see the changes in their facial expression. They're more prone to jump into bad conclusion or think negative, and various different consequences that are on the mental level. On a psychical level is where the individuals don't show any eagerness, joy, excitement, laughter, and things as such. You can see the depression much more present in individuals' presence and appearance. And then we have physical depression, where the individuals just don't want to get out of the bed or do anything. They're completely paralyzed, and we call that a silence death, because the person completely disassociates with their surrounding, with their loved ones. They have no motivation, no hope, and is just the most severe level of depression. And also here in a worldview filter, there's this loop that is very important, that is a reaction of subconscious. We are constantly programming our subconscious as well by this worldview. So there is this loop that happens throughout our life, and we're constantly doing this. The things that you're putting in our worldview filter, the way that we relate to the world around us, the universe, ourselves, others, natural laws, many aspects of our existence, that forms our worldview filter. The processing that happens in terms of our inner thoughts, which in another level becomes our words that we say, our ideas that we express, and on another level becomes our behaviors, the ways in which we hold ourselves and operate based on. And that is constantly affecting our subconscious, and consequently we have the reaction of the subconscious. The subconscious is programmed to the age of 6, and once it receives this information, we have some subconscious reactions to it as well. That this subconscious reaction goes to the mental body, also it gets communicated with the psychical body, and then so on. We would have some reactions that are associated with the subconscious as well. And there are different loops here that we discuss in Cosmointology, which is psychical reaction on a subconscious level, and then there's a loop here, and then there is this other reaction that is a reflective reaction, which is associations, which if someone let's say, had an accident and then they hit their head um, somewhere, and then at that exact moment they were smelling some perfume, and then after that they developed some negative associations with that perfume that could trigger their headache every time they're exposed to that perfume. So those are other aspects that we'll talk about later. But overall, we're just talking about various different type of software that exists within ourselves and the operations that are affecting how we react to the external circumstances, how our reactions are associated with this process, and how we can really alter those reactions by working on the worldview filter. We just basically getting introduced with how important it is for us to know how this worldview filter is programmed and what type of reaction it causes when it comes to the various different circumstances of life. So, as you know, we discussed before that any quality that you're aiming, or any quality attribute, or anything that you're aiming in the Erfan Halgheh, it's relying on the specific halgheh. So anything that we are talking about changing or optimizing, there is a halgheh that will help us with. But that doesn't mean that everything's going to be automatically done by the halgheh, other than something like Faradarmani. Other aspects which we will be introduced later on in the course, it demands cooperation from our end in terms of wanting this worldview to change, and also participating willingly with changing this worldview filter, because otherwise the halgheh wouldn't come and forcefully change our worldview, like let's say how we relate to rain or snow or the hot weather or mosquitoes or cockroaches. So the way in which that we want to relate to the external world, there are some aspects that we willingly need to participate in. And that's why it's very important to understand this whole process and all the layers of our existence, see the interrelations and interconnections, to uh, become familiar with the importance of all this operation, um, and its relationship with our illnesses or disorders, the difficulties we have, the states, negative states that we experience throughout certain circumstances, and so on. So, before going further with our discussion, let's do a 15 minutes etisal, and then we will be back and continue our discussion. Let's do it. Thank you. All right. Let's continue our discussion on the different types of depression and how that affects our body in various different ways. So, in this graph, we looked at the sequence of events in which the external events would be perceived through five senses, communicated to the brain. Then the brain turns it to appropriate information, going through the worldview filter, and then the worldview filter changes it to appropriate information to the mental body, psychical body, and the physical body. Then we have a physical reactions. We have the consciousness emission reactions from a psychical body, and then as a result, we have the consciousness emission depression, if that is negative, and then we have mental depression, psychological depression, and physical depression. So, what happens when individuals are starting to get to the T-consciousness um, T-consciousness emission depression. So when there is external event that encounters the perception filter with a negative worldview, what happens is that the type of information that is being extracted from that would be negative, and then that would be causing the psychical body to produce negative emission. And these negative emission causes contamination of the individual themselves and others to the um, certain area around the person. So when individuals would be around another person with an emission depression, after a while, they might also get depressed or get affected by those depressions. Now, there are some of these negative consciousness emissions that affect some specific professions, as we discussed before, for example, psychologists, counselors, lawyers, dentists. There are some individuals that get impacted by these negative emissions as a result of those um, consciousness emission that is around them. The thoughts and the thought patterns of human beings, I have either the positive aspects or negative aspects. And we can see in this chart that when there is positive, then the consequence of that is a positive emission. And following that, it is the positive spirit. And then we have a psychical efflorescence. But then when it is negative, the thought causes the negative consciousness emission, and then uh, that causes the individuals to show negative emotions, and then that causes depression. Now, when that consciousness emission depression happens, there is this radius of negative T consciousness emission around the individual's body, and that contaminates the psychical body as well, and also starts to gradually take over the individual's entire body. So as you can see, first it affects the psychical body, then it goes around the brain, and you see that there's more of a concentration around the brain, and then gradually start increasing to the level that it uh, encompasses the entirety of the body. So the second stage of depression, as we talked about after consciousness emission depression, is where the individual's mind, thoughts, and perception gets impacted in a negative way. And that's the um, stage that the individual still is able to demonstrate laughter or some positive physical impressions that it might not be obvious immediately that they're dealing with depression. And then we talked about how the third stage is psychical depression, where the individual's emotion gets affected and it becomes more apparent in their appearance, and they're starting to lacking showing any type of positive emotions. And then we have the physical depression, where the individual's appearance and the way in which their facial expression is, the way that they hold their body and they move, it's completely obvious. And that's where the individuals are disassociated with their surroundings, with their loved ones. And that's what we call as what we refer to as silent death. That's where the definition of life loses its meaning, the spirituality loses its meaning, the individuals are completely disconnected from outside world as well as their inside world. Everything that they hear or see, they're very disconnected. They have no emotions. Uh, there's no motivation. And for these people, they don't feel the scans as well, and it causes individuals to really have a lot of difficulties in terms of operating in a normal way. But with continuing using Farad Armani, they can feel the improvement, and we can do a test, which is the depression test, through the scan of cosmic force. And the way that it works is that we will hold our hand like this. And I'm going to go a little bit back so you can see me better. So we're going to hold our hands like this. And we're just going to observe the force entering our hand, and or just basically see if it does enter our hand. And if it does, then up to what point it goes. And if it goes to a certain level where that is, or if it just goes through the hands and exits from our head, we just want to observe that and see how that is. So let's do this test, and we can close our eyes to have some like more less distracted from external sources. And it's not mandatory, as you know. So let's do this test, and then we can actually monitor this progression as we go further. You can do it on your own as well. So we can just have this experience of gradual improvement in terms of how this force would basically move forward and clear up. If this force is getting stuck at certain point, it means that the emission depression and the depression is involved in those areas, and they're more pronounced or present. And then by continuing using Farad Amani, it clears up, and then we can see the flow coming from the hand and going through the body and exit the head. If that doesn't happen, for some people might not even enter the hand, just touch their palm of their hand, or just to stay outside, which basically means that the depression, it got to a noticeable amount of progression. And if it enters and gets to the arms, or elbows, or the chest or the head or anywhere, we just want to observe where it gets stuck, and then how that is. So let's do this test, and then we will be back and hear some reports, and then if there are any questions, let's do it. Thank you. Anyone would like to share? Any questions? Okay. So the next topic we're going to talk about is the types of death in the eyes of Erfan Halgheh. We have three type of death, which is imperceptible death, physical death, and definite death. In imperceptible death is where the negative energy of depression took over the entirety of human existence. And from that point, all the spiritual connections of individuals are disconnected. And it means that they're still able to understand things, but they don't have any motivation. And that's why we call it imperceptible death, because the individuals is kind of like a walking dead. And we have the physical death, where there's the moment that the heart stops functioning, which is typically where doctors pronounce the individuals dead. And that's where the individuals is pronounced dead. And there's some difficulties with that decisions, because there are cases and incidents that the individuals came back to life after being pronounced dead. From the eyes of Faraday, that's not a definite death, because still the 100 trillions of cells, including the mental body, psychical body, and astral body, is still alive. And for that reason, there's a possibility for the persons to come back if the heart start functioning again for any reason. And then we have the definite death, where in the eyes of Erfan Halgheh is where the astral body dies. And that's where the uh, death is imminent and it can't come back. The individuals cannot come back. And usually happens minutes after the heart stopped working. And sometimes it can just remain alive. Astral body can remain alive for a few days after the physical death. And for that reason, it's important to allow those times for the individuals for the potential individual coming back. And until that astral body is not dead, then the definite death has not happened yet. The experience of individuals being pronounced dead and coming back to life has been observed throughout the history and throughout the world. And that became one of the challenging phenomena, that it led doctors to keep the corpse in the cold rooms for a few days to make sure that they're not coming back. And if they're buried, they would not have a chance to come back. So it is very important to understand the different types of death and how the heart malfunction or stopping of the functionality of the heart would not really determine the definite death. So there is this possibility of heart stopping to work and without any thrombosis or blood clot formation in the veins, be able to start working and then have the person come back to life. So from that perspective, allowing a few days longer is important to be considered in the world of science and for the doctors. So after the definite death, what remains alive is mental body, and in fact is the only body that remains alive. And this is the body that would continue life after death in spacelessness, uh, basically a realm that the observer is no longer limited by space dimension. So is able to actually be in any place at any given time instantaneously, and also have a 360 degrees vision. The mental body is what is called, or what is referred to as soul or spirit in some cases in mainstream. And we have a very specific definition for those words like spirit and soul. So we don't consider them equal. There are different aspects and different functionalities and qualities. So the mental body is basically what we mean when people generally refer to as a ghost or soul or spirit in that way. There are some experiences with after death experiences when people like die or go to coma and come back, and they have reports of that operation on a mental body and how that is, and how they don't have any emotions and they still have access to their memories and things like that. We will discuss that in depth more in its appropriate place, but this is it for the theoretical material for this session. So if you have any question or anything you would like to share, let me know. If not, I would let you guys go and wish you a great night and good week. Anyone have any question before we go? All right. So thank you so much for joining. This is it for the theoretical material of this class, and wish you a great night and see you next week. Thank you.